Hello, everybody. My name is Jelani, and welcome to the 12th episode of the DeSci Rising series put on by DeSci World, where our goal here is to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci world and wider DeSci community. Now, the idea behind all of this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community using these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we are looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industries. Now, in today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Andrew Bax and Andrew Verbinnen, who are both the co-founders of HairDAO, which is a platform that is focused on curing hair loss by funding early-stage research and companies that are particularly focused on better understanding and treating androgenic alopecia, which for those of you who don't know is just the medical terminology for patent hair loss. So welcome, Andrew and Andrew, and thank you both for taking the time today to help us learn more about yourselves, but also what you guys are building or what is being built at HairDAO.
Thanks, Jelani. I appreciate that introduction. Um, so maybe we can just start off talking about ourselves a little bit, how we got into this, and then take it from there.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. So Bax, do you want to start it off?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, got into the space as an investor in 2017. Still invest in the space. Basically, uh, as yeah, I mean, the investor stuff's going really well, but obviously struggling right now. But I basically just got fully immersed in the Ethereum ecosystem just over the years. Like it became clear that Ethereum was going to be the only layer one blockchain, and that there wasn't much else to invest in at the layer one level. And then it became, okay, so what can we build at the layer two level? I think, and then kind of as time continued to go on, because didn't really have an answer there, have messed around with a few different apps. Um, I saw what HairDAO did with the IP NFT, and kind of clicked that this was the coolest thing that had happened in crypto yet. Um, and frankly, I didn't even understand how cool it was at the time. At first, it was like, oh, these are just NFTs with real utility, which I think, because like after watching the whole OpenSea and digital art wave, not to be a hater, like people can pay whatever they want for anything, but it's just like it didn't actually have any real value, and so kind of just stayed on the sidelines there, didn't hop in at all. But the IP NFT, like actually to me, was the first real world use case that could um, get mainstream adoption and provide a ton of utility. And separately, I've been suffering from hair loss for at least 3 years, probably longer. So, yeah, kind of put two and two together, and then as time went on, just kind of just kept realizing like how big the problem really was, especially in hair loss. Like when we first hopped in, frankly, like we didn't have any idea just how underfunded it was. But the more time that we spent, I think the more we realized that, like, holy crap, like no one is doing anything here. Um, and so, yeah, now here we are. It's been it's been about a year since we launched, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So then, and I'm Andrew Verbinnen. I'm the one behind the HairDAO Twitter account right now. So Bax and I've actually known each other since high school. Which is kind of funny. We both grew up in New York City. Um, and I also got involved in crypto as an investor, and very similar revelations around, Ethereum being really the only thing we wanted to be invested in from like a value perspective. So then sort of the next logical progression was figure out a place to where we can build in the space, and saw HairDAO. And I personally have sort of like had problems with hair loss probably since I was about 20 years old. I'm 26 now. So very early on, it was kind of like, okay, hair's falling out. What can we do to fix this? And I think I was just like blown away kind of by just how inadequate the solution set was. So for some perspective, right? Like there's only really like three main treatments to hair loss right now, two FDA approved medications. Um, One of them is minoxidil or like Rogaine. And then the other one is finasteride. Uh, Kind of like funny side note, but they were both discovered by accident. So minoxidil was discovered in the 1950s as a treatment for hypertension. It's really not that effective on most people. Finasteride was discovered in the 1970s as a treatment for enlarged prostates. Um, and while it is more effective than minoxidil, it has like really severe side effects. So it's like sexual dysfunction, can actually like make you infertile. So it's like a pretty big risk, obviously, just to keep the hair on your head. And then the third option is hair transplants, um, which one are super expensive. There's, they can go up as high as like $15,000, 25,000. But then also they're actually not an option for most people. So if you're diffuse thinner, right, like you're losing your hair kind of evenly throughout the scalp. A transplant doesn't work for you. And then there's also sort of more and more research coming out that's suggesting that hair transplants aren't as permanent as the transplant industry would like you to think. So so sort of seeing like that problem there, right? It's like, wow, there's this is a problem that literally over 60% of the population deals with. The solution set is so inadequate. Why is that? And so I think what we looked to and what VitaDAO was kind of a guiding light for us was that rather than like sort of biological technical limitations, anything like that, it was really industry incentives that were kind of holding the space back, and primarily the fact that hair loss is classified as a cosmetic condition, which means that sort of the government funding agencies like the NIH uh, really like almost funded like no early stage R&D um, into hair loss. And so because of that, there was really no solutions. And then I think outside of sort of early stage government funding, you have like Roman and Hims and those guys who are sort of optimized marketers and sellers of the current solutions like minoxidil and finasteride. But rather than sort of reinvesting their profits from the industry into R&D, they actually spend like over 110% of their revenues on just further marketing, which really doesn't benefit the hair loss community at all. And so, yeah, looking at all those industry incentives, we're like, wow, okay, it's an incentive problem. And in our opinions, like Ethereum is one of the best effectively incentive machines in the world in terms of how you realign incentives within an industry. And so we figured we could use the DAO structure on Ethereum to hopefully to hopefully solve hair loss over a period of time.
That's great. And you bring up a few points that I wanted to touch on throughout the conversation. So first and foremost, shout out to Vita and the Molecule family for catalyzing this innovation, this revolutionization of the science infrastructure. Um, Big up to them. And specifically to you two, are you guys scientists by training, by education, or not?
So uh, I'm a I majored in like a subset of mechanical engineering, product design. Um, but like self-taught crypto kind of just took the same principles. Actually, what was wanted to get into biology, because one of the like just as time went on, it just like increasingly piqued my interest. Namely through like David Sinclair's Lifespan book. Maybe you guys have heard of. But uh, basically like have been climbing up that learning curve for the past year and a half now, which has been uh, honestly a lot of fun. It's really cool to learn about. So
Yeah. Also no scientific background on my end either, but I think that kind of touches on a pretty amazing part of sort of the DeSci revolution. Is just there's so much information online now that if you're willing to put in the time, you really can kind of learn anything you want to. And so I think going forward, a couple of the one big project that I'll let Bax talk about in a bit, but is really geared towards just increasingly facilitating this like internet native scientific researcher, that I think I think, for example, because hair loss has been so underfunded, there's really not too many traditional researchers in the space. And so I think as a result of that, you have these massive Reddit communities, Discord groups, various things like that forming, um, and really like really impressive self-taught internet native researchers have kind of started to emerge. And so what we do is HairDAO, right, is kind of give them like uh, a tool that where we can sort of organize our labor and our capital to actually take sort of Discord debate, uh, turn it into like actionable research and studies that we can hopefully generate intellectual property from.
For sure. And maybe scale it back to something you guys mentioned previously. So, a vast majority of the human population suffers from hair loss in its variety of forms, but androgenic alopecia is, I believe, the most prevailing cause of hair loss. That's quite a large cohort of individuals that you would assume corporations and capitalistic ventures would be interested in sourcing money from. Why is that not exactly happening, right? Like, the impetus, the investment in R&D would yield a massive return, considering that it affects so many people. So where's the disconnect here in the industry?
Yeah. Yeah, great point. This is a big selling point for us. So the market is very fragmented, and also that fragmentation's kind of lends itself where no one wants to step up. So uh, the first org to go to for early stage bio research, like as you definitely know, is the government, right? Like the NIH. So the NIH does about they've averaged about 5.4 million a year in early stage hair loss research. But that 5.4 million, which is like minuscule, if like I'm sure as you know, that's like 10 studies a year. So
Very small.
if we raised half of or if we raised what VitaDAO raised, we could literally match the NIH, but also do it a lot better. Like the NIH, they make their investments out of the National Institute of Skin and Arthritis and Musculoskeletal Disease. I may have switched up the order there for a few of those, but those are the three. But yeah, there's no even hair loss representation. So you'll see a lot of hair loss researchers pairing their hair loss research with like wound healing research for it to be included in that batch. Um, so like angiogenesis is like a big thing that you'll see in hair loss papers for that reason, which is obviously like not optimal because like they're two different, like very different problems. Um, so that's the government side, and then you turn to the private market. So in the hair loss industry, there are kind of two players. You're either a distributor or manufacturer. So distributor like Hims, Keeps, Row. I'm sure you guys have heard of that. Manufacturer also like the obvious ones, Pfizer, Merck, J&J. So with the distributors, they essentially take all the money and just invest it all in marketing. They literally have zero R&D investment. So they're paying Facebook or Google to show us ads, and then we click those ads and pay them. And then on the manufacturing side, the two hair loss drugs are both off patent, minoxidil and finasteride. So no one, uh, there's no like real economic profit to reinvest, and then they struggle with early stage research more generally. Occasionally, Allergan will make like a big deal that they're kind of like the players in the space that do pop up every now and then, but even then, like very small. And we've talked to like our top researcher from the traditional world who's is we're actually going to announce that through Molecule will be funding his our first IP NFT. Like they gutted a project with him that had promise. Like it's still not enough money from them from Allergan. And so those are kind of the two camps. And then oh sorry, also within the private camp, there's also hair transplants, which are about actually like 60% of the market. It's about a $7 billion uh, total like revenue a year market. And the problem with transplant practitioners is they like it's a services industry. Like these guys and girls or whoever they're artists. So and they can't really scale their time. So what they do is they take their profits and maybe a few will like expand their facilities. Like there's some pretty big transplant facilities, but you can't really scale it past one facility. Like the ones like Bosley or what like they don't really sell that well. Um, but yeah, and then they take their profits and they usually just invest in stocks or bonds or what have you. They're taking it out of the industry. So
Oh, yeah, and just to put sort of like a closing point on that too is just to be honest, like I think it's just a brand. It's also just a brand new business model, quite frankly, that hasn't been possible until now, and then that's really enabled by the IP NFT, in terms of turning intellectual property into an on-chain and liquid asset, and tradable asset. And so, I think for all the reasons Back said, people would typically look to the government to fund this sector, but in cases where they're inefficient or lacking, um, we believe there's pretty huge opportunity. Um, and I think that we have this intersection of crypto and bio, There are just very few people and groups, I think, that have just been able to put together, sort of connect the dots, if you will. Um, the effectively just a really cool new business model that's enabled by this new crypto and IP NFT technology.
No, for sure. Reading through your guys's your white paper kind of really solidifies the fact that, I mean, it brings up a really interesting points of how you do the market analysis, right? Clearly, as you mentioned, these companies, these existing companies, are investing very much heavily in their marketing wing over R&D. Now, some of that is probably from the difficulties of the scientific perspective, but it would seem to indicate, at least to me, that, and I think everybody can see this, there's a large need, there's a large want, there's a large demand for hair loss treatment, right? So the people are there and they're almost foaming at the mouth for anything that is feasible. And that kind of, the industry is kind of capitalizing on this desperation in terms of shilling these products that have existed for like since the 70s and 50s without actually making new products. But the consumer base is just continuously buying after them. There's really no incentive for them to develop more things because people are still buying these, finasterides and hymns. I see hymns commercials on YouTube all the time, right? So there really is a gigantic marketing push, and people keep falling for it. So it seems like you guys are really sitting on a gold mine of opportunity, both from a financial but also an impact perspective with the idea of HairDAO.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll say a couple things. The first thing that I just think is based on what you said. I think the first thing that we always talk about, is just so underappreciated. Is just the massive psychological impact that hair loss has on people, particularly like younger in their lives. And I think we see that through like Discord messages, where we were sort of like screenshotting the other day a couple of like the most striking ones, but people really are like deeply impacted by it, and so if we're able to fix that, I think it'd be a pretty huge deal for a lot of people. And then in terms of the community really chomping at the bit for new solutions, I think like you're absolutely right, because they really are. And I think one of the biggest things that reflects that um, is sort of these effectively these like biohacking communities where people are effectively going on, which is really prominent in the hair loss industry, where people are effectively doing their own research and organizing group buys from Alibaba, uh, in obviously a super unregulated way, because they're conducting tests on themselves because they're so desperate for new solutions. And I think that's fine, like to sort of tie that together, this sort of group buy activity and things like that. I think it's a really cool innovation if it's channeled in a responsible way in DeSci, in terms of effectively bringing down the cost of clinical trials, by sort of leveraging these like group buy communities, to get good data out of them, and then see if we should take various treatments to more sort of formalized trials. But yeah, I think people are clearly just chomping at the bit for better solutions.
Absolutely, right. And not to make any callous jokes on this, but we can see it clearly with examples of, I think if people had put more emphasis on the importance of or the psychological impact of HairDAO, we wouldn't have instances of like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock over jokes about Jada, things like that. So clear
Yeah,
that's very very overt way to show that, there is definitely more to this underlying aspect of hair loss that I guess is not being, because it's not a life threatening thing. I guess these insurance companies are not, vying for it, but definitely is very impactful. And I like that you bring up the fact that there's this underlying layer of like networked mind share or mental capacity, this globalized network of mental capacity that are actually vying to do this themselves. So, potentially through backdoor means, there's a lot of potential that we can tap into, or that you can tap into there.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's honestly one of the most exciting things, because it's just enabling patients to bring products to market effectively, and which I think is just amazing, because it's like a bottom up sort of progression versus a top down, like arbitrary people making, or who aren't necessarily as connected to your affliction or whatever it may be. And I think um hair loss is one of those cases where it's very like it has sort of a funny stigma around it, I think, where a lot of people really don't like to admit how much it kind of like messes with their heads. And so a lot of people, we were talking to one of the guys we're working with, and it's funny because like a lot of people, honestly, from afar, have sort of thought that we're almost like a joke project, or like we're sort of like making jokes, but it really is like a pretty serious problem for a lot of people. And like to be self-aware, right? Like it's all within reason. Like it's not the world's not ending, but I do think it's more serious for a lot of people than it gets credit for, and I think that plays a role in it just really being overlooked from an investment standpoint.
Absolutely. And I would challenge anybody who claims that your project is a joke to go look at your website, because you guys have done a very beautiful job showing the professionalism behind the project and the intent and the roadmap, excuse me, down the line. So these people
Thank you,
obviously
and
scaling.
don't look at it just yet, because we're actually about to unlaunch. We're about to launch like a new website launch. So we'll don't look at it just yet. Give us like a week or two, and then yeah,
we,
see
we
what you
got
think.
we got like the branding treatment from the molecule accelerator, and the guy who his name's Cy McClellan, and he's like or I might have botched his last name, McLennan. He's like a terrific designer, so that'll be exciting.
That's fantastic. All right, so we'll leave that little segment to the roadmap question. But so let's talk about the DAO itself. So this is an example of one of the DeSci has kind of subdivided itself into a few different classifications of DAOs. So we have the research funding DAOs like yourself, Molecule, Vita DAO, Athena, who's in the crowd. Then you have the tech stack builders, and I see Eric here. Big shout out to DeSci Labs and Opscientia and all those who are building the DeSci primitives, which are going to be very useful. Some of which that includes Molecule as well. And so, just to kind of understand, can you give me a little breakdown for those who don't know about what exactly HairDAO, how HairDAO is built?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the infrastructure plays are thinking, but we're like a token only play. So more like the so like I
Bax, can you guys hear me, or did Bax just cut out?
sorry, it said I'd been muted.
Oh,
Yeah. So no, really just like the pure application play. Token only, like very much like a DAO, like a pure DAO approach. We'll have a Swiss Vereen to hold our off-chain investments. Um, and we may have like special purpose vehicles to facilitate VC investment. But other than that, like pure on-chain DAO.
uh, yeah, and so then just in terms of like what we're doing, right? So I think it's important that we're like you said, Jelani, we're funding early stage R&D in the space. Potentially could fund some of like the top hair loss companies in the space. But then we're also doing, we're not just a like pure sort of like investment DAO. There is an operating component, and we are in the early days of building two pretty cool projects. That Bax, maybe if you want, Bax has really been leading the database effort, but I think just going back to what we touched on earlier in terms of further enabling sort of these internet native researchers to kind of up their game and creating this sort of hive mind. I think we're building more of those sort of tools to effectively just make it easier to convert anybody into a scientist.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, Bax, if you want to touch on the
Yeah. No. Definitely. I think so we're kind of launching two separate products that are kind of similar, but for different end users. So the first one, which like anyone can be a part of, really anyone can be a part of both, but is what we're calling the patient database. And so the patient database is really just uploading relevant data and receiving hair tokens for it. You own your data. It's fully encrypted. Every time that a computation's run on your data, and we'll use federated learning frameworks, so it will be able to be like we can integrate with underlying decentralized technologies like IPFS, etc. So yeah, upload your data, get paid every time we run a computation on it. You own it at all times. So designing that product out, which I think will hopefully give our scientists more information to work with. And then on the scientist side, creating tools for our researchers to communicate, sort of like create almost like a hair dictionary, like some sort of like singular truth on at least what the current state of hair loss research is. So like what pathways, what proteins, how they interact with each other, at what part of the hair cycle, the relevance, what happens when one's down-regulated, up-regulated, et cetera. So, so that's less consumery. That's more for like really our internet native researchers. We'll see if we can get the traditionally trained ones on it. I would guess not initially, but then eventually, hopefully, we can work it into their flows. So yeah, those are really the two big products that we're working on right now.
And then in line with that, we are in, like Bax mentioned, we are in the process of funding, uh, or at least we're ratifying to the funding right now of our first research study. So again, this is more like the investment side of things. But our first research study with Dr. Ralph Paus, probably I mean by the numbers, I think actually one of the most prolific hair loss researchers um, in the world, and we'll be effectively testing T3 and T4 thyroid hormone um, on human scalp skin organ culture. Uh, to which will probably this you know the study will take about a year, and so it's a good sort of um, first study that I think could bring a new product to market sooner rather than later, which I think everybody's really excited about.
So I can say, for those of you who know, DeSci World is an information aggregator. So I very much am, enthused by the idea of you guys putting together a hair database that kind of scrapes together all the known knowledge base of what is affecting, just hair loss and hair relevant research. I think that will go a long way of making, the general lay community more engaged and enthused to work. It almost makes like a positive feedback loop, right? These people learn
Mhm.
more about it and then therefore come and contribute more to helping grow this database and impact that HairDAO is having. So that's super cool. Um, Now the other thing though is that this idea of working with Ralph Paus, who you say is one of the leading research individuals on hair loss. So the project that you're looking to fund, or one of the projects that you're looking to fund, it's a topical use case of T3, T2 and
Yes.
T3
Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah.
so relative to the current therapies that exist, so finasteride and Rogaine. So Rogaine is a topical, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So
So
Rogaine,
minoxidil can be oral or topical, actually. And so people are taking it orally a lot more recently, and I think it's definitely more effective than the topical in many instances. But there are also some potentially nasty side effects, just in terms of like your cardiovascular health. So yeah.
yeah, I imagine, right? Because you're doing
Yeah.
you're providing a systemic application of a therapy versus a localized topical one, right? So I imagine that similar to the invasive non-invasive paradigm,
Hmm.
um, would be cool. So can you guys speak? I know you may not be, uh, the researchers in this particular thing, but can you speak on the project itself and what they're aiming to do and give us a little bit of a breakdown?
Uh, yeah, for sure. So at least to our knowledge, no one's actually ever tested topical T3 or T4 for any dermatological indication, including hair growth. So uh, no one's really done it before. We're going off a lot of prior work, specifically that Ralph's actually led. So the study was proposed by Ralph, and then yeah, obviously, like we work with him to iron out the design and communicate it with the community. But yeah, so Ralph's done a lot of preliminary work around both drugs, one other derivative too, um, and but never on scalp skin before. The furthest he's ever been able to get was in follicles. So he's actually done T3 and T4 application just on the hair follicle itself in a lab, but he's never upgraded to the scalp skin part. So um, that's really the goal here.
And is this project at the stage of this funding? Is it going towards a clinical trial, or is it still going to be basic, in vitro type research in its current iteration?
Yeah, so this is in vitro. After this one, it really depends what we hear from the IRB, the International Review Board. So we're essentially we'll accumulate a whole bunch of data, hopefully from this, and then take that to them and say, what do we need to get this to market? That part's still up in the air. We're not really sure. but only one way to get there, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely, trial and error, right? This is where I think a lot of us are at this current moment. There's not a lot of framework or guidelines or SOPs that tell us what can and can't work. So we're all kind of fielding it out. Um, so that's really cool. So you mentioned Molecule Vita DAO and their framework as being the underlying framework that you guys are building off of. So what happens with the IP given let's say this becomes an effective therapy or this moves forward? How does the IP ownership and how does this work for HairDAO?
Yeah, so real I think so the real world entity that we'll probably use will be a Swiss Verein, like a nonprofit Swiss Verein. But what will happen is we will in the not too distant future, probably um, in January at some time, we'll launch the hair token, and that'll be a governance token. It'll at least start out on a one vote per hair, one hair basis. And the community can decide what they want to do with the intellectual property. If we want to license it to some biotech, if we want to sell it, if we want to just hold it. Which I don't know why we do that, but yeah, it'll be fully governed by the community of hair token holders.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, there's actually a really cool framework being developed by Molecule's lead lawyer, Jesse Hudson, and also his kind of partner in crime, Chris Burns, called Friends and Fam, where essentially it's like liquidity mining for licensing. So where what's mined is sub licenses. So like bringing DeFi practices into DeSci, which like they're super smart, like Molecule's entire legal team. So it's really exciting to watch what they're doing.
That is definitely going to be beautiful. I think the merger of DeFi and the capital that is maybe not right now, but in general, the capital that is flowing through DeFi would go a long way in helping DeSci projects kind of move forward. And so, okay, so you mentioned a token, which is always an interesting aspect because it opens up opportunities, but also risky liabilities. So if you guys can, I don't know, and I don't know if you can talk about this yet, but when you do launch this token, in what form are you going to launch this token? Is this going to be a fair launch? Is this going to be like an IDO or, I sorry, ICO, or what's the format?
Yeah, it'll be a fair launch. We haven't decided how large of the raise we want to do yet. We have some ideas, but it's definitely gonna be a fair launch. We very much like want to make sure that like this is a community driven effort. Like it's decentralized from day one. Like what the second the tokens are. Um, yeah,
And important to note, yeah, that we'll be buying our own tokens at the same time as the rest of our community members. And there won't be any, yeah.
That's I think that's the in my opinion, and in what I've seen, that's been the leading the leading way to go about it, um, to skirt or to be mindful of three-letter agencies knocking on your door like, hey, you're selling a security.
Yes.
I think there's, in addition to that, there's extra things in DeSci that I don't think we've run up against quite yet. Like, we have to worry about the financial three-letter agencies, but there's also these health and medical related agencies like the FDA, I believe you said the IRB, for yourselves that we need to be, I think, as a space, need to be cognizant of. Have you guys put any thought into, how to deal with those kind of things, developing your own legal framework? Because you did say you were incorporating, albeit as a nonprofit, but there's still a lot of ambiguity with how DAOs work with, handling of intellectual property and the like.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I if you want to add Andrew, but I was just thinking that like really we're an endowment like that's there's no dividends. Any profits made are going to be reinvested into future research. Um, so yeah, we're like I understand why regulators kind of look at uh like you have to do it right? Like you have to make sure that you're like following the rules that make sure you're not a security. So we're just doing the best we can, to be honest. Like taking the endowment approach, the nonprofit approach. Um,
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And to be like completely transparent, I think just a lot of these legal frameworks are literally in the process of being developed. And so our philosophy is just to um, effectively to do what's right and abide by sort of this like school of fish philosophy that um, is common in law, where it's sort of you do the right things and the community kind of coalesces around um, certain practices and standards that are character, are sort of good actor behaviors, and then eventually the legislation, like the more formal laws, get put into place based on that, and those practices. So we're just trying to to do what's right, and then as the sort of legal frameworks come up around that.
I love that, and I'm sure your community and who are going to eventually be your community after watching this great interview are going to appreciate this notion of you guys being cognizant of these different liabilities that may come about in the future. So, you mentioned that there's going to be no revenue share. This is going to be a fair launch token and the like. So, two questions. One, how does the incentive structure work for HairDAO? And two, and you could feel free to answer that first one first, but two, what chain are you guys going to be launching on?
um so yeah, the I mean, in terms of the incentive structure, it's really like, to date it's been bounties on certain projects and people effectively voting on, like, someone will propose a project, um, and the community will say, like, yes, and a budget for that project, and the community will say, like, yes, we want this done, or no, we don't want this done. And so then there'll be a project lead that kind of allocates that budget as they see fit, including paying themselves as well. Um, and then in terms of the chain we'll be launching on, it'll be Ethereum, um, for sure. So
Straight like L1 Ethereum?
yeah, yeah, that's what we'll be launching on, just primarily because it's sort of um, it's just where the most capital is. To be honest. And so a lot of the people with more significant capital are a little bit hesitant to move it too much of it onto layer twos.
And also just explaining, like, oh, you have to, like, bridge from Ethereum to Arbitrum. There's still like a lot of like
Complexity.
roadmap. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
still a lot to get people through there.
No, for sure. There's definitely going to be a learning curve for that. But I just wonder if, right now things are down, but as things move up, we know what kind of gas prices Ethereum had at certain peak points. And so are you not concerned, or do you have any concerns of that maybe making it almost being prohibitive for new members or not non-whales to come and participate in HairDAO?
Definitely. And I think we'll sort of continuously evaluate that, uh, and probably end up operating on one of the layer twos at some point. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Multi-chain, I think, is the future. So that's
Yeah.
that's great. So in terms of the bounties that you mentioned, so these are paid out in, or the rewards of which and the incentives of which are paid out in HairDAO, or are they paid out in like ETH, stable coins? How does this work for HairDAO?
Really just based on the incentive structure that the person, that gets negotiated. I think particularly for our best contributors, we'd love for them to take as much hair as possible so that they're as aligned with uh, creating value for hair as possible. But obviously in some of the more traditional roles, for example, like Ralph can't fund his study with hair tokens. So uh, it's really on a per case basis. But the more hair that our top contributors would accept, the happier we'd be, because that just aligns us with them.
I see. So when you mention contributors, you have people who are like scientific advisors and whatnot. But what
Mhm.
about like people who contribute to working groups? So I did see that there was the traditional breakdown of various working groups, which I feel like the regular community members can join and contribute to. I
Mhm.
imagine they will be receiving incentives in hair.
Yeah, so right now it's really just on a per project basis, which I think has been good, because quite frankly you have a lot of people who are coming in and out of the project, and so I think it's just best to reward them based on actual productive output, rather than sort of like based on a time schedule or anything like that. And so yeah, it's really just a per project. And I think we have some ideas, definitely, particularly around like core members who we would want to be full time, and how we would incentivize them in the long run. But leading up to the actual auction, it's really just been sort of on a project basis.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's nice. And so in terms of the projects that are being funded, so you mentioned the first one with the T3 and T4. Are there any other projects in the pipeline that are coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there. So we have another one with Ralph. That's really exciting. So there's this drug called FK506 or tacrolimus. That's like the only drug, at least that I'm aware of, that if you take it orally, it doesn't induce hypertrichosis. Hypertrichosis is essentially like hair regrowth, like excessive hair growth. But if you apply it topically, it does. So that is kind of a that's a really unique feature. Like really don't see that often. So studying the pathways behind its topical application, and then trying to uh, find new things essentially. Um, and then other than that, we're working on some genomic, like more like base level, like spatial mapping research proposals. There really isn't like that sort of base level research into hair loss that you'll see in a lot of diseases. So a lot of people are still flying in the dark. And then also like a whole list of, to be honest, there really aren't that many players, so we actually have like a very like a long pipeline, like go on for a little while. But like another exciting one is this company called Stemson Therapeutics. They're a stem cell company in San Diego. They're essentially like the biggest hair loss R&D lab in the world. They've raised $22 million. Private company. They're using the iPSC process to essentially create more hairs in a lab, and then ideally one day transplant them. But they're like it'll take them 5 to 10 years to have, you know, at best, hopefully knock on wood, a meaningful product. So um, I think those three are good ones to highlight.
You
Definitely.
know, it's interesting that you bring those up because it's for such a you guys keep quoting that it's such a minimally innovative space, yet you have a decently filled out pipeline for people who are for a DeSci related project. Like how has been the onboarding of people into how has been the conversation of, hey, like this is DeSci, we're looking to develop crowdsourcing funding mechanism or infrastructures. Has the interest been high, or have you had a lot of turnarounds? Because it seems like you've onboarded quite a good amount of projects.
Yeah. So for one thing, I think this is one of the things that Tyler from Molecule always talks about, but when talking to like researchers in particular, it's best to sort of leave out the crypto part and really focus on how you can get their research funded.
That is a fact. That is a very
Yeah.
good fact.
Like they don't really care that you run on the blockchain or anything like that. They like Ralph cares that we can fund his thyroid hormone study. And so I think um that's been good. I think you know, as time goes on, we at first people sort of don't really get it, but we just keep building and then they kind of keep watching and they um eventually sort of circle back and because it's a pretty interesting concept. And yeah, I think that you know the deal pipeline has been good. I think there's an increasing. I think the timing might be very good for us because I think there's an increasing sort of awareness of how much people do care about their hair, and so there's definitely sort of a new and emerging ecosystem of potential investment opportunities, whether it's companies or early stage R&D.
Absolutely. And so you guys mentioned that, and this is something that I wanted to touch upon with other DAOs in the space, but you mentioned that, finasteride and minoxidil were discovered by accident, as great scientific therapies often are. Have you guys looked into developing a framework similar to crowdfunded cures, in terms of looking at off-patent drugs as, potential therapies for hair loss, unknown potential therapies for hair loss?
Definitely, we've actually spoken with Sava from crowdfunded cures a couple times, and would love to incorporate that mechanism somehow. Um, there's definitely it's definitely I think you know you got to build up a community around the treatment option that's willing to fund it. but it's definitely something that we'll look to incorporate, and we have looked to incorporate, and we probably will at some point.
Well, yeah, just to add on there, like I think a lot, like even if you don't use the off-patent drug itself, like looking at the pathways behind its effect on hair, um, which is like something Ralph's done in the past too. He worked a lot with cyclosporin, which is an immunosuppressant. It's like if you're having like an organ transplant or something pretty intense. So yeah, it's a toxic drug, but it also induces hypertrichosis. So you can look and say, oh, like this like it upregulates this pathway. Maybe we can find a different drug that only targets this pathway. Um, so definitely.
That's good. I like to see, collaboration occurring in the space across all these different DAOs, right? Similar to the multi-chain hypothesis that, eventually all blockchain or all interactions in Web3 will be multi-chain or multi-asseted. I think DeSci is going to flourish as we start to pull together different arms and different branches of DAOs that, collaborate and kind of iterate off each other and help build each other up. So I'm looking forward to that kind of future. In terms of and you guys touched upon it a little bit earlier, but in terms of HairDAO's roadmap, like what can we expect from you guys in the near future? So there's the new website launch, which is very exciting.
Yes.
Anything else?
New website launch, minting of our first IP NFT with Ralph, assuming the community ratifies it. The token launch probably in January. So continuously
The database product I would add to that too.
Yeah. So I was going to say sort of continuously adding to our deal flow pipeline, adding as many researchers as possible, digitally native and traditional, and then in parallel with that, really the database project that Bax had mentioned earlier, and then also as sort of a this one's we have a cool concept that I don't even want to get too much into because it's just such early stages, but hopefully trying to leverage sort of the existing hair loss market and find ways to funnel more of those revenues into R&D rather than marketing, like we talked about with Roe and Hims and those guys.
That's exciting. That's a lot of cool stuff. I will admit that I did go creeping through your guys' pages, your website pages, and I did notice something of an NFT. Can you guys
Yeah.
speak on that a little bit? Because you always like to appeal to degens, and I'm sure degens are eventually going to make up a good component of the DeSci space. So I appreciate that you guys are going the NFT route to some extent. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. It's so it's we minted it a couple months ago. I think there's about 38 holders. There's 38 of those NFTs. And it will afford that it's representative of like our very much like OG initial group. And so I think there'll be we'll incorporate utility for it at a later date, but there will be utility with the NFT, particularly around like early access to various treatments and things like that. Bax, if you want to add on the.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that's right. Just like about rewarding the people that were kind of there first, in a way that's fun, and just continuously providing value to it over time. Like we have a whole bunch of ideas for how to provide value for it, but it's still pretty speculative. But like like stuff like first rights to trials or first rights to drugs, free access to certain products that maybe we charge for, just stuff like that. So should be fun.
Now that is actually a very interesting use case that I haven't heard many people mention, right? So just to kind of break it down, in traditional DeFi, there are quote unquote use cases that are attributed to these NFTs, often access to, events and this kind of superficial stuff. But DeSci does open it up to the notion of actually having impactful therapeutic and medical utility being attributed to these NFTs and to the holders of these NFTs. So it's interesting. So let's say I'm a holder of these HairDAO NFT. Sorry, do they have a name? What's the name of the HairDAO NFT?
The Hairly Adopter is the name.
Ah,
Yeah.
right. So let's say I'm a Hairly adopter, right?
Mhm.
So then if I'm suffering from hair loss, or if I want to contribute to a clinical trial relevant to that, that NFT is kind of the key or the gateway that allows me to enter this HairDAO ecosystem preferentially, or something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We would still, there are only 36 holders of it, so we couldn't really fill up a full trial with it, but it would be like a first access sort of thing.
No, for sure. I imagine those becoming, as you guys, achieve your successful points. There's going to be more and more people interested, especially considering the fact that, like you said, right, 85% of the population suffers from hair loss. If even just a fraction of that is interested, that's very interesting perspective for the
Yeah.
DAO, and a very useful DAO tool. Um, and so as we, reach the top of the hour, I do want to give opportunities to people in the crowd to ask questions if they do have some. But in terms of how the wider community can kind of help support you guys, where would you direct them? What would you have them do?
Um, I mean, join our Discord, please. I think that's the best place to sort of actually work with people who are doing things in the DAO, and to get in touch with both of us, and also other people who are building projects, and just figure out how you can help based on your skill set. I think um, what's just really underrated is you don't necessarily need to be a scientist or anything like that to help out, because we do have so many different projects running in parallel. So it's like uh, data scientist, developer, lawyer, marketing expertise, anything like that we could really use. So yeah.
And in terms of the hair database, so I keep bringing that back because that's particularly interesting to me. Can anybody who joins the community contribute to that, or is there kind of a vetting process to make sure that you're qualified enough to contribute to the hair database?
Anybody will eventually be able to, in terms of the actual like written, anybody could contribute their own personal health data, right, like their genomic data or their treatment data or anything like that on that side of things. And then there'll be like a peer sort of, you can contribute any of your own written research, and there'll be sort of a peer review system that we still need to design, so we can effectively filter for um, high quality submissions versus maybe something that's a bit more inaccurate.
That's great. So last question before I do open it up to the crowd. What is your guys' definition of success for HairDAO? Like 5, 10 years down the round, what are you expecting? What are you hoping to see from HairDAO?
Effectively, that anybody, um, any normal person just doesn't have to deal with their hair loss. Like, we want to solve hair loss, and we think it's possible with just concerted effort um, over a meaningful period of time, like 10 years. Um, so yeah, that's our primary mission, is to solve hair loss.
I absolutely agree. I think the prospect of using this distributed brain power network is really what's going to make a lot of changes and make all of these things possible. So Ed, I see that you put in a request. I will bring you up. Just give me a second. There we go. Let's wait for it to connect. Ed, if you have any question for Andrew and Andrew, please feel free.
Yes, it's great to hear this approach by HairDAO, because I remember reading probably 15 to 20 years ago a study that said that if somebody could come up with a solution to this that was safe and effective, that it would be the number one money-making pharmaceutical in the world. I don't know if that's still considered the case, or what the value of that global market is now estimated it could be, but which of course brought up concerns of when you've got that kind of temptation of a global market, that it's ripe for all kinds of, weird things to happen. So, but it's good to see this sort of approach to the issue. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our biggest strengths is that we will be patient owned, and governed. So should always, because of that, we should by definition always be acting in the best interest of the patients, because the patients are the ones calling the shots in many regards. Um, and I also just think it's good because when you're patient owned, you're more incentivized to skew towards actually pursuing true innovation versus kind of trying to riff off of the community, which I think we've seen with a lot of the current sort of hair loss companies. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I imagine too that, as participants of the DAO, there is also a financial or a financial interest that they can reap a reward from this as contributors?
Yeah, so I don't think we can really touch on that at all.
That's
But but yeah, I think it's a big differentiator. I'm not a huge believer in just pure charity. I think there needs to be some sort of like like a mission driven organization tends to actually drive larger impact than a charity or anything like that. So that's my perspective. But
absolutely. And I think there's difference. Oh, Bax, if you wanted to touch on that, sorry, go
Oh no, I was just gonna say, not legal advice.
ahead. Not legal and not medical advice. We're gonna have to
yeah,
add
Yeah.
extra disclaimers for ourselves. But I agree. I mean, somebody said it very beautifully in one of our previous episodes, Open Therapeutics, that the space, what is going to be successful in the space is the ethos should be doing well by doing good. So we will reap the rewards of the capitalistic rewards of helping develop these therapies just by aiming them towards actual public good and good use case. So we do need to fund, we need funds to do these things.
Yeah.
But if we do good, then we'll probably do good as well. So
hundred
that's it.
percent. And just to add, like, there should be some sort of inherent value to governing the IP, right? Because if you're governing the IP, you're also setting the prices in the licensing agreement. If we productize everything within the DAO, you're setting the price the consumer pays. So even if we can't talk about dividends, like hypothetically, there should be some sort of value derived from that.
Exactly. And what's beautiful about that is it'll be determined by the people who are actually going to be using it. So we're not going to have a Martin Shkreli. I don't know if he's in the crowd, but sometimes he does pop in, but any shenanigans in that way. So that's the beautifulness of that. So I have a couple questions myself, things that I'd like to touch upon, just out of curiosity. So you mentioned that you are having a lot of success in terms of pulling in research organizations and corporate entities that are doing the actual research. But I imagine that you also need researchers to sit as advisory people, just also researchers in the crowd. Have you had that same level of success in terms of bringing on researchers as community contributors? Because I mean, not I can imagine, I can tell you from firsthand, it's very tough to get researchers into DeSci, even if you don't mention crypto or
yeah,
blockchain basis.
yeah. We have a couple, but I would definitely say, for example, getting them to use the Web3 tools, like even I mean, and not even Web3 tools, but like a lot of people are just unfamiliar with Discord, so it can be difficult to get people into Discord. But I would say honestly, that's been a big push of ours recently. Is really like a lot of effectively just biz dev work, reaching out to these people and trying to get them to um, join, and it's definitely been difficult, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah,
And
just to add on,
yeah,
I would say it's been especially difficult in like non-English speaking
yes,
countries because there is a lot of good research going on in Japan and Korea and China also. Um, and it's just hard. It's hard because like even in those places they're even less accepting of crypto. Especially in a place like China, and then on top of that, the language barrier is also hard. Just because like the DAO is predominantly English, if not like overwhelmingly English speaking. So um, that part's been a little tricky too.
For sure. But what I will say about that, though, and that is a very good point. DeSci, a little shameless plug here on our own end. DeSci World has initiated this coalition of individuals called the World of DeSci, and this is pulling together these various regional groups, DeSci Africa, Italy, Japan, China, South America, Brazil, Latin America, and the like. So, HairDAO, if you guys are looking to kind of branch off into various languages and get in touch with these various global communities, you're always welcome to come and hop in there and talk with these regional DeSci leads. They might be able to help you in terms of translation services and all this kind of stuff that'll help you reach a broader uh, user base.
amazing. Yeah, we're absolutely looking for that. So we will do that. Thank you for that offer.
Absolutely. Um, and so the last question before I guess we close off is you mentioned your hair database. People are able to opt in or volunteer or contribute their own medical data or their own data of sorts to this database. And you said it remains under their own ownership. Is there um, an infrastructure of tokenization of that data that you guys are developing, and as well, how does that work with, let's say, a third party consumer that is looking to get access to that data?
Yeah, 100%. Great question. So, the essentially it's encrypted where it's like with decentralized access control. So, after the patient uploads it, we still don't have access to it. What then happens is the patient will click grant access. Um, and then after that, whenever we want to run a computation, we'll be able to decrypt it for the computation. But we won't look at it during the computation. So we'll use federated learning frameworks where um, essentially, like, people can be confident we're not even looking at it when it's decrypted. We're partnering with a provider called Nevermind, or we're very likely going to be partnering with them, and uh, they kind of obfuscate all of that, so we don't have to build that, which is great because that's a product in and of itself. So that's kind of how it's working on the AI side, and then on the uh, like tokenization side. So, like we said, you'll be rewarded in hair tokens each time a computation's run. But also, what's really cool is like each model, uh, like each AI model that's generated from your data is also can be represented by an NFT. So we can actually issue NFTs to our users that give them ownership of the model that they've used. And then also we can represent their data or as an NFT as well, and create marketplaces around that. Um, Although, like, would obviously need additional consent there from the patient if they want to sell their data to or grant access to another organization besides ours. Um, so I would say those are the big ways we're using tokens.
That's very good, because I was going to follow it up with a question in terms of, are you guys going to monetize this, and how is that going to feed back into the people who are actually giving up the data? Um, so yeah, is this going to be a future monetizable project towards third party people who are interested?
Yeah. So the way we're monetizing it internally is by just hopefully being able to generate better research from it, and from that generating better IP and increasing the value of the hair token that way, and rewarding the user for helping us. But then also, yeah, giving the user the ability to earn cash. Like, let's say someone else wants to license the data. Um, like, it's the user's data, right? Like, they shouldn't be forced into a monopoly with us. So, um, definitely want to follow Web3 principles and provide the patient the ability to do that.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a huge. I think tokenization. We already see it, right? Tokenization of assets is a big thing, but tokenization of data, scientific, biological assets is going to be a huge marketplace in the very near future. So I'm glad to see you guys are thinking about that already. So I have no more questions, and it seems like the audience has no more questions either. So Andrew, again, thank you very much for coming on and helping us learn more about both you guys, and your very cool project. I think HairDAO is going to be a rousing success, as it lies on, a huge gold mine of opportunity from this, both from the scientific innovation side and the therapeutics and impact on people side. So I commend you guys for being the first movers on this. Um, I'd like to also thank the rest of the community here who has come to join us and listen and ask questions. Ed, I think you're gone, but you always ask great questions. And so, do you guys have any parting words for the community?
Um, I just really appreciate you having us on, Jelani. I really enjoyed the conversation. Um, and yeah, we'd love more contributors. So anybody hop into that Discord.
Same here. Ditto that.
Great. So I just wanted to let you guys know yourself. So DeSci World, so you guys are up on the DeSci World dashboard, but DeSci World is just about to launch a new updated version of how we go about doing things. And that will give your dashboard entry, ownership back to yourself. So you guys will be able to update it, add all the new features of the new website that you want to think, and it'll be all under your own purview. So that's coming up soon. So look forward to that. Um, and I think that's all I have to announce. So with that, guys, again, thank you. It was a pleasure to meet both of you. I hope I get the opportunity to meet you guys in a real live DeSci conference, hopefully soon. Are you guys coming to DeSci London, by the way?
I'm not, unfortunately.
Okay.
When is it?
DeSci London is January 15th, I believe.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
It feels far in the future, but maybe.
Mhm.
all right. Well, I'm not too far from New York, so if ever I pop into New York, I'll definitely give you guys a shot. I'd love to have more opportunities to sit down and just get to know
Definitely.
the builders in this space.
Definitely, please
Definitely.
do that. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely will. So, guys, I wish you both a very great weekend. The rest of the listeners, I wish you all a very great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you back for episode 13 of DeSci Rising, which will take place next Friday at the exact same time, 12 p.m. EST. Have a great weekend, guys, and enjoy.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Shalani.
Bye.